Last time I was discussing several of the severe political, realistic, and society-changing choices that faced the party. I also mentioned that they had several immediate problems with the fleet and the military force down to the south. The very next thing the party decided to do was to head out of the first sanctuary, seal the door behind them, and basically run as fast as they were capable of doing towards where they believed the Telvanni encampment was. They made it there with no particular issue. Now, I haven't talked about the Telvanni much as a culture, as a society, but basically they are very polite and they are very by the books. To them, it makes perfect sense to think that way, and that's why the people there tend to gravitate in such a manner. The Telvanni are very you know. Now, they are rather hospitable people, and when they showed up, keeping in mind that this Telvanni force is by definition political and military, an advanced force, as I was describing to my party, um, I'm sorry, I need to put this pillow here. I know it looks stupid. Oh, it helps me stretch my back out. I've been having serious back problems lately. The Telvanni and the Redoran haven't had actual bloodshed in quite a while. What will usually happen under standard political circumstances is one side or the other will approach with a force just like this, and they will wait on the border. If a certain period of time passes, which is actually 3 days, by the way, if 3 days pass and there has been no response or retaliation or anything from the other side, they have the political and diplomatic right to claim that area. Their land grab is successful. They win. If the enemy does respond, there is no actual fighting. It is simply recorded that, okay, now we have responded, and what happens then is it then goes to the politicians and the diplomats to hash it out. And whoever wins in the political circle is the one who then wins, and they get the land or keep the land, as the case may be. Yay, they win. But this has been the way of warfare between Telvanni and Redoran for literally generations upon generations. Actually, centuries would be a better word to put that. So they go to Telvanni, and Telvanni are just kind of camped out, hanging out, if you know what I mean. And when the two Redoran individuals, Fear and Assail and Flux, show up, they're just like, hey. And they're very jovial about it. They're very, like I said, they're very polite. They're very well-meaning. Hey, what's up? Oh, yes, we're here to officially respond to your incursion. Oh, very good. Let's go ahead and take you to our commander. So they take them back to General Franklin. Now, Franklin's a good sort. He's been general of this particular regiment for many years, over a decade actually. And so he, invites them to sit down to some water and hardtack, and they discuss the situation. Now, the party did something that was actually quite brilliant, and I'm not sure they fully realize how intelligent this was to do, because they had the job of convincing Telvanni that Leilu was about to launch a major offensive against them, which they were. But there's been no word of that on the Telvanni front, and this is very convenient timing for this to happen. Even though they have no reason to particularly doubt Redoran's sincerity on the matter, without proof there would have been a time delay, if you know what I mean. And as I tried to emphasize in my last thing, this next few events I planned out, at least I should say I planned out where things would happen without player intervention to the hour, within an hour bracket. So they were on a time crunch, very literally. What they did was, using their knowledge of what they had seen through the scanning device, they actually laid out a map for General Franklin of where all the troops were, which included the Tlelu, and the massive mercenary force, and the fleet, and Redoran's troops, and Telvanni's troops. That was the clinching fact, the fact that they were able to prove that their information was accurate by showing Telvanni where Telvanni's forces were. You follow where I'm going with this? Brilliant idea. And Flux had this wonderful line. I forget how he phrased it, but it was basically, this information is about an hour old at this point, but we're reasonably certain about it. And General Franklin just kind of looks at him for a moment, and so they start debating the issue. And the two individuals, Flux and Fear and Sail, are actually quite honest with him and quite open with him, because they both realized that this was the potential for something that has never happened before in the history of this island, a true alliance between houses. And it would all start within this room. What they did was they made history in this room. I apologize for not reciting the entire conversation. Great deal of NPC conversations with the players going on for this period. Suffice it to say, Flux agreed to accompany the Telvanni regiment south to join a second regiment which is in the area to oppose the Hlelu invasion, which he believed was coming within a matter of hours. Firnasil decided to go north, was handed the general's private horse as a way of gratitude to make the journey north as fast as possible, and the general also sent some pigeons out in order to get word to the politicians and stuff like that. And then something else happened, and this is hilarious. This is the history-making moment. The general wanted them to sign an agreement on paper saying, "We, as representatives, duly elected representative of House Redoran, because any member of the military of House Redoran or Telvanni is, by political definition, a duly elected representative." That does not go for Hlelu, by the way. We, as blah 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 blah, do sign that Redoran during this period of time and incursion will not make any form of land grab or political or military attack upon Telvanni. That's all the general wanted. He wanted some assurance, because from a Telvanni mind, having that on paper is all they need. Even if it was possible that they would break it, having that signed document means that that would be committing political suicide, and it was very probable that House Redoran would collapse if they were to do so, and Telvanni knew that, and the general knew that. The players then pushed for that to be expanded upon, and they signed a declaration of intent towards mutual defense and economic cooperation during this time of hardship, which is that history-making moment I mentioned about making an alliance, because that is what's going to happen, provided nothing else gets in the way. Spoiler alert. That first step has put the wheels in motion, and now the politicians can either try very hard to break, or go ahead and go forward with it and unite the two houses in a way that's never happened before. So bravo to the players. They then split up. Now, this is funny because someone actually asked me, how do you handle party split ups and stuff like that? I'm okay with party split ups as long as it's handled properly. It is admittedly a little bit more difficult to do. What I tend to do, especially in a situation like this, because this is a temporary split up, and B, one occurring over the course of actually, hang on, one, a grand total of about 6 hours pass from this moment until the resolution of this session. That's not a very long period of time if you're paying attention, and that's kind of my point. For a period of time like that, I have no problem splitting. What I tend to do is go back and forth in about half-hour periods. A half hour of in-game time passes for you, go back over to you. It also gave the players some time to think, because there are some really interesting issues for them to deal with, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to do that same method here, by the way, when I'm describing what happened. Fir Nasil left immediately. Now, nothing actually happens for about the first hour, because that's about how long it took her in order to reach the outskirts of Haverdam, which is the port city for Redoran in the area. It is the most likely spot that the Hlelu fleet was going to attack. Now, she was correct in this guess, thankfully, because, when she arrived, she encountered a large force. Well, I'm sorry, no, she didn't encounter anything. She got called out by a simple audio signal that said, "Identify yourself or be treated as hostile." And it's an audio whistle thing, that kind of thing. She immediately stopped her horse immediately, put her hands to the side, and pulled out a white flag, saying, a scout, Redoran scout, came out and said, "Identify yourself." And she promptly, pulled out her insignia and pin and said, "House Redoran, sergeant of third platoon. I'm here on business, and I need to speak with someone in charge immediately." And the scout, without wasting any time whatsoever, immediately turned around on his horse and said, "Follow me." And he led her. This was quite a ways outside of the town, by the way. These guys were quite on alert. He led her into the town, and the whole town was going about its business like nothing was happening. There was just citizens walking around, no sign of military forces whatsoever. And he takes her down to a back alley and goes to what is effectively a basement door and says, "In there, please, ma'am. I can take your horse if you like." At this point, Fir Nasil became rather suspicious, but after a few rolls decided, well, okay. Went ahead and gave the horse to him so he could go take it off, and entered the basement door. And it was not a trap. It was, in fact, the de facto headquarters for the Redoran military resistance. You see, what they had been doing, and I'm sure plenty of you already figured this out, when they sent the message some time ago, about 2 hours ago total time now, no, 3 hours ago now total time, sorry. It has been a little bit. They already had a regiment within the vicinity of this area, because there's always a regiment near the Hlelu border, right? Another regiment is on its way, but it will not reach her in time for the fleet. So what they did was they encamped this regiment within this port city, which they believed was the most likely target again, and they were right, and hid them so sufficiently that it looked like the city was undefended and would not actually strike until they felt the moment was right to do so, in order to gain some element of surprise on the invading forces. Now, I mentioned Alexander because he is a Lugian who also happens to be a lycanthrope. So he's very fast. This is why they got a sufficient amount of warning. This is why they're already basically set up and ready to go now, a mere 3 hours later, because he sprinted at full speed across the landscape in order to get here and give them this warning. And he is in fact giving them the report about the fleet now, which is at this point visible over the horizon to him with his incredible vision. So he's giving his report. She comes in and says, "We have a problem," and she reports to the general everything that she knows about the situation. This is not just one attack on us. They're attacking Telvanni too. I have sent a representative of my own in order to help the Telvanni, and they're moving south in order to engage. But we need to do what we can here, and we'll see what we can do. And the general says, "All right, we'll figure out what we can." What did I decide his name was? I gave names to several of these NPCs, as I usually do. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. That's a shame. This general, oh no, Marcus, that was his name. General Marcus nodded and finished getting the rest of Alexander's report, and then turned to Alexander, who he is deferring to, because Alexander is here as an official representative of the kingdom of Alluvia at this point, because Alluvia and Redoran have officially entered actual negotiations for treaty and whatnot, and so Alexander is a duly elected representative, if you follow me. I may have mentioned that before. I apologize if I'm repeating myself. Whatever. So, he turns to Alexander. "Do you have any recommendations?" Alexander turns to Fear Nasil and says, "How long can you hold your breath?" Fear Nasil says, "Just a couple of minutes." "Why?" And he says, "Oh, I have this idea, and I want you to come with me, and we're going to go have some fun on the enemy ships." And Fiona Sill says, I love this. She says, "I don't think I'd be of any use to you. I've already blown most of my abilities." Keeping in mind, by the way, and this was done on purpose as a GM and as a storyteller, as of this point, they have not rested for quite a while. Not actually since they were in the garden, which was before the research facility, which was before the fortress and the domicile. It has been a while, and they have not rested, and they have not healed up, and they have not. Well, obviously they're at full health because she did that one heal, but they're basically burnt on all their abilities and all their powers, right? So she she basically says, there's nothing I can do. I'm sorry. And he says, "All right, well, I'm going to go do that and see what I can see." At this point, I went ahead and skipped back to Flux, as Fear Nasil spent about a half an hour's time, basically getting some rations and mingling with the troops and trying to figure out what she could do, thinking. We cut back to Flux. The General Franklin, and Nameless General, I didn't actually name him, meet, and General Franklin informs the other general what's going on and what the problem is, and they both agree to start jointly sending out to collaborate to jointly lead this combined force here in this battalion at this point, and set up defensive positions along this point. This whole terrain, I feel like mentioning, is basically farmland and plains. In fact, the area that they are defending, the area just behind them, basically to the east, is basically nothing but villages and towns. Quite a few, actually. There's nothing of any strategic import there other than people. Okay, that's important, or will be later. Flux is called in for one of the military meetings, and they'd start discussing the situation, and it is asked of him, "Do you have any capacity to scout?" And he says, "No, but I have the capacity to defend." So he is sent with 2 scouts in order to see where the enemy positions are, see whatever information they can go. They get to a certain point, and the scouts hand him little stones that are a specific form of magic item, which is basically a way of saying either help or "I'm dead," if you follow me. So he takes both stones, and he sits there for about 10 minutes. Then one of the other scouts comes running back frantically and says, "Where's the other guy?" And Flux says he hasn't come back yet. And Ica says, "Okay, I'm going back to the camp," and he runs off. Flux is like, okay, and he decides to wait. A few more minutes pass, and he doesn't even have to make an awareness check because he knows what it looks like to see a large force of troops, a large force of people moving. there's no real way to hide the dust cloud, you know? And he sees that and he looks at that for a moment and he does a few quick mental calculations and he realizes they're basically right there, you know, within almost within visual range. And he's like, okay. He makes a tactical decision, in his own words, to abandon the other scout, run back, and try and, you know, warn them. He gets back and immediately is taken to General Franklin, who's still in a meeting, and he says, "They're here. You got to do this." And General Franklin looks at him and says, "Where's the scouts?" And Flux says, "Well, one of them should have been back already. I had to. I have no idea what happened to the other one, but his orb hasn't had anything yet happen yet." And the general looks at the orbs and says, "These seem off for some reason." Now, Flux, as you know, is a very skilled weaver. He actually has a ridiculously high weaving score already. So he takes them and looks at them and examines them and realizes that these have been tampered with. Both of them. This is actually a bit of a retcon. If either of my players are watching this, I apologize. I meant to mention this at the time. Both stones have been woven in such a way that they wouldn't actually signal even if the scouts had been killed. Which means either the scouts themselves were infiltrators of some kind, or someone sabotaged them, or something. But either way, it means someone on the inside did this. If you understand my meaning, which was a very bad feeling. And then the general says, "All right, you have the only intel we have, you know, tell me how big this troop is." And it's actually a total force that's a little under double the size of the Telvanni double regiment, you know, the battalion they have. It is a huge force that is advancing. So they go out and start getting ready. Well, actually, no, that's not what happens. Franklin converses with the other general, and in quiet in this meeting with Flux present, they discuss the fact that they don't think this is going to work, that what they're most that they hate to leave and leave the heartland of their villages at the mercy of Hlelu. They feel like they have to go and unite with the Third Regiment and bring back a united front in order to confront a force of this size. Anything less would simply have too many casualties, especially with an unknown quantity like this. Now, there are a couple of factors in mind that they weren't aware of at the time. I'll mention those as we get to them. Uh, at this point in time, the person playing Fear Seal, I skip back to her and I say basically, you have like a half an hour if you want to do anything in this time, and she's like, well, not really. And all of a sudden she just comes out of nowhere. Oh my God, that power I just got, the control flora and fauna power, does that work underwater? That was the moment when I realized that this whole thing was going to go in a completely different direction than I thought. I tend to plan quite a ways in advance. I already had planned for the general wildlife in the region of the island because I figured it might be relevant. I already planned for the fact that she could use that power underwater because I figured it might be relevant for several reasons. And I already planned for this Navy invasion force to come into range, start bombarding the coastline, and having this huge battle. That last plan just got thrown out the window by that mere thought because I realized in that instant the sheer power of what she could do. And I just looked at her, and I was like, yeah. And I tried to keep it hidden because even at that moment I knew it was over. And I'm not complaining, by the way. It was awesome. But she says, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and start attuning myself to the water. And I said, okay, that's going to go ahead and give you a plus to the overall roll. Or no, I didn't give her a plus to the roll, but it was something I think I said she had to do. She had to attune herself to the water and be in the water physically. And the range of her ability was basically line of sight, which we figured out to be about 3 miles, I believe. So she's out there in the water waiting for the ships to come into range. Cut back to Flux. Flux talks with the generals and says, and basically convinces them to hold the line, because he believes that with his last summon or whatever, however many summons he's got left of the day, and some strategic use of his last use of Steel Body, which actually I gave him as a fiat because I figured it would be awesome. He feels like he can help turn the tide of this battle, and there were several dice rolls involved, but the point is he believed it was at very least a good chance that he could help this battle work out. So, Flux goes out with the frontline troops, and the Hlelu forces come into visual range to the point where they're basically in attack range, right? Telvanni have a crossbow line set up, which under these circumstances, I think you can imagine just how brutally brutal that would be. The Hlelu do not have any ranged weapons at all. These are people who have piecemeal armor and look like, the word I used at the time was conscripts. The Flux was a mercenary, right? I've mentioned this, and he has in fact been a mercenary for all three houses in the past before he decided to permanently become an official representative of Redoran. So he knows what mercenaries in Hlelu are like. They tend to be seedy. They tend to be, kind of this kind of guy, and they tend to be misshapen and kind of rough, scraggly, all that. These looked like people who had been picked out of their farms and given weapons, right? He found that interesting, but before anything could be done about it, the leader of the enemy force, which I never gave a name either, although it gets a name, yells, "Charge!" Now this is also something I pointed out was out of the ordinary. The standard rules of warfare, even when Hlelu are encountered, and even when actual bloodshed happens, which is very rare, is very simple. It's very orderly, You sit up, they sit up, the two generals meet. We discuss terms. If we come down to the actual bloodshed, we say, okay, we get back, we signal we're ready, they signal they're ready, we start fighting, right? This guy just says, charge! Right off that, no warning, no nothing, which is odd, even for Hlelu, and something that I felt worthy of mention. Hlelu opens fire with their first barrage of crossbow bolts, which decimates the front line of the Hlelu forces, and then is reloading their second line, and that's the point at which Flux decides to charge into the melee. And Flux starts rolling pretty well, and he goes into full elemental merge form, which is where he doesn't actually. I've mentioned he's a green mage, but he doesn't actually. In this case, he doesn't summon his elemental. He actually merges with it and becomes a stronger being as a result of that. So there's this gigantic, giant, 3 feet taller than everyone else, earth elemental thing with a massive shield and a gargantuan two-handed axe in one hand. And he is just cleaving. Oh, by the way, he has cleave. And he's just cleaving his way through these armies and just laying waste and pushing his way through them. I'd like to take a moment to talk about something, if I may. Actually, I meant to say this at the beginning of the video. I hate to interrupt this awesome scene, but one of the things I am not is a rule lawyer. That term exists for a reason. And while it is often used as a derogatory or a negative, to be fair, a rules lawyer is just someone who believes the rules are the law. This is how you do things, right? I am not of that mindset. I am someone who believes the rules help to assist in the storytelling and the social aspect and the enjoyment of the game, and help serve as sort of guidelines. Not to quote Pirates of the Caribbean or anything. I just mentioned that because I can just picture several people, including one person I know, whenever he gets around to watching this, will be yelling at me about this because everything that happens in the next few things are completely against the rules, and I am totally okay with that. Moving on. So Flux goes charging in, and basically, I actually did up a map thing, and here's each thing I put down was like 8 troops total, each squad, and here's all the Hlelu forces, and here's all the Telvanni line, and here's you, and he just starts charging his way through, and he starts pushing north to start flanking the overall force. Now he is succeeding quite well, and he just keeps rolling gold, seriously, just constantly, until it gets to the point where several of the Hlelu forces are actively cowering, trying to get away from him, and are pushing back against the people who can't quite see what's happening, which is forcing them to push forward against the other troops who are trying to push forward against the Telvanni, who have now started to advance with their melee in a lot more organized fashion than they're doing. Yeah, this isn't going well for Hlelu. Despite the overwhelming size of this troop, they are behaving very poorly and are getting routed, basically. After a certain period of time, several minutes of him pushing through, it's already become apparent within minutes that this force is falling apart. He decides to spot where the general is, the general in charge of the Hlelu force, and he finds him running away. And he says no, runs after him full tilt, grabs him by a neck. And I want to mention again that at this point Flux is a 9-foot tall giant earthen monster thing. And he turns to him, and unfortunately, I do not remember the whole speech he gave. It was rather awesome. But basically he says, "You have lost. You are now going to turn over here and order your troops to run away." And he succeeded his intimidate check for some reason. So he goes and, holds the general up, and the general gives the order, "Run away!" Most of the troops do run. Several do not. 6 squads of troops do not run. Now, Flux then successfully basically knocks several of those troops prone and does subdual damage to several of them, basically making it so that they can be taken prisoner rather than killed. Telvanni, of course, is all for this. Telvanni does not like shedding blood. So they take these 6 squads of troops prisoner. Now I'm going to go ahead and skip over to Fear and Seal, because that's basically the extent of that battle. I'm sorry if I feel like I'm underselling it. It was an awesome scene. He was doing awesome. He was just, yeah! And basically just routed an entire battalion, more or less by himself, or at least by his intervention. Meanwhile, in the north, the Navy has gotten in range. Fear and Seal can has a pretty good feel for what's going on in the waters here. Now these ships are traveling an extremely dangerous course, very near to the coastline. In fact, the bottoms of their ships are actively brushing against some of the seaweed in the area. That's how close they are to the shore. They're doing this so they can get right up on the town, bombard it to heck, and then immediately disembark and do their thing. She also can feel Alexander, who is swimming alongside one of the ships, preparing for any sign or any moment to hop on board and start doing his thing. She then reaches out with the seaweed. Now, I actually laid out, here's the ships, and here's their formation. 5 of the ships were basically in front of the rest. This was a total fleet of 12 ships, which is huge by the standards of the time and the era, by the way. And she took the first 5 ships right here in front, right? These 3 she had she pulled up with her power that she had just gotten a massive amount of seaweed, grabbed the rudders, and forced these 3 ships to start turning in on themselves and towards the shore. And then she grabbed these other 2 ships and actually forced them to twist like this, okay? So that these 3 ships are doing this. These 2 ships are basically forming a wall, while the other 7 ships, God, are still going full tilt after them. Now that by itself might have been salvable, except for the fact that she rolled well enough on her will, basically, to successfully make one more action. She didn't get a third action, which she did try for, but she did get a second action. She had a massive amount of extremely slimy algae come soaring up out of the waters and land all over the decks of all these ships. And at that point, the whole party just started bursting out laughing, because I don't know if I've mentioned this, but one of my players is in fact someone who has been in the Navy. And I'm not, of course, nearly as experienced at that, but I have also been on a ship, and I also know what it's like to have algae on a ship. And that was it for that fleet, basically. That was the death knell. Because nobody on that ship was capable of moving around with the sort of speed and urgency necessary in order to recover from that incident. So the entire fleet basically crashed on itself, and people started colliding into each other and getting injured on the splinters of the wood as the ships were cracking and breaking under the strain of impacting each other, and people were flung into the pillars and flung overboard. People started yelling and screaming, "Oh my God, what's going on?" that kind of thing. It was complete and utter pandemonium. I spent quite a while describing the full totality of the disaster, the catastrophe that she had unleashed on the greatest military fleet ever assembled in the history of the Visayan Lacelle, which she had just single-handedly stopped. It is also worth noting that Alexander, who is a lycanthrope and therefore has claws and can move around on the algae just fine, was kind of having a field day on a group of people who couldn't do anything back. I actually rolled for how many survivors there were. There were a grand total of 40 survivors on all 12 ships. That's it. Yeah. The General Marcus came out, and as the people were literally leaping for the shore, desperately trying to surrender. And General Marcus just looks at her. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm kind of missing a part of this, because, again, I was doing the back and forth thing. I had just finished the part where Flux had basically single-handedly routed the army, and came back with the enemy general in his hand. And so, I was playing the general, so I was like, okay, let's get back to you in a second. I go over to her. Then I cut to her, and this is where this point comes in. The people are surrendering, and the General Marcus comes up and looks at her. They both got a kick out of that. And so General Marcus looks at her and says, "Ma'am?" She's like, "Sir." The official history books are going to show that the fleet ran aground, and that what I just saw was not what I just saw. And she's like, that seems like a good idea, sir. Good. I'm gonna go have a stiff drink now. And she's like, can I join you, sir? And he says, no. You may not. He wasn't laughing, obviously. No, you may not. And then he just kind of turns and leaves. And she's just like, wow. And Alexander comes up, and he starts pitching. He's like, oh, what you could have, what was this? I'm not going to be of any use. I've already used all my abilities for the day. No, I'm not going to be able to do anything at all. And she's just like, what? I hadn't thought about that one. He's like, really? You took all the fun out of it. I got up to there, and I managed to get like 2 guys down before they were all falling over on the ground, and it was just boring. I cut off like 6 guys' heads before I was like, okay. What's the point of this? Why'd I even bother? And she's like, I'm sorry. And he's like, whatever. And so she and Alexander and Fiernesiel joined in the celebration for a bit and had a bit of a drink and blah blah blah. We'll get back to her when when the two rejoin, basically. Getting back to Flux. Now this is the part where, fortunately, Flux was, well, for lack of a better term, paying attention. Not that I doubted he would. The player, obviously. The general begins giving heartfelt pleas for them to spare his troops, and whatever horrible punishment they seek to put on them, to put on himself. He will take the burden of the blame. Now, Telvanni found that to be a joke, and they were like, what? And didn't even fully grasp it. Flux then said, no, you're going to go back and you're going to tell them that no one is ever going to attack us ever again. And the general says, I refuse to cooperate, basically. And so Flux says, okay. Leaves the enemy general in the Telvanni's care, and he goes to the troops, the Hlelu troops. And again, these look like kids. A lot of them are shaking. A lot of them are just kind of, probably from battle stress, but also from a very genuine sense of trauma, of overwhelming fear. Now, he is still in his giant elemental form, by the way. And he's like, he gives this awesome speech about how you're going to go back, and you're never going to come back here and attack us ever again, and you're going to tell everyone that this is what happens when that comes to pass. Now, one of the gentlemen stands up and basically says, whatever horrible fate you would have befall us, we would rather die. I would rather you kill me now than be taken prisoner by your horribleness, by your tyranny. And several other people then stood up with him, showing a sign of assent. At this, Flux was rather perplexed, and so he went ahead and shaped back into humanoid form. He looked at them weird for a second and was like, okay. I just told you that, you're going to go back, and we're going to let you go. We're not going to kill you. We're not going to keep you in prison. You can go back and everything. And the guy again is looking at him and says, I don't know how things are where you're from, but there is no way I will ever let you continue to torture or oppress fellow islanders if I have anything in my breath to do about it. Now, Flux found that very interesting, and he decided to have the guy come with him. Now, it took some serious convincing to get the guy to come with him, but he was like, just come on. And the guy came out. His name was Fael. Fael. I actually was pronouncing it wrong tonight, too, when we were actually gaming. It's so silly of me. Faela, that's it, actually, not Fael. Faela, there we go. God. Faela is the gentleman's name. He's just a guy, and he brings him out. And I'm not going to go into whole detail, unfortunately, because I have a problem re-emulating the emotion that was in the scene. But he brings him out, and he says, General! The general's like, yo! And he's like, could you get me, like, 20 random troops? And the general turns around and goes, oi! At the top of his lungs. And 20 random troops show up, and they're like, sir! And Flux says, hey. And Flux just starts talking about, how horribly and terribly we treat our prisoners. And the whole group just laughs, because the thought of mistreating prisoners, even military personnel, is laughable to Telvanni. And the guy looks kind of, Phala looks kind of confused, and then Flex says, "Okay, well, what about this horrible oppression? I mean, this gentleman wants to free you from your tyranny." And one of the Telvanni troops is like, "Yeah, oh God, I get home at night, and my wife's like, take off my muddy boots and clean up my hair, and oh, it's such terrible tyranny." And again, they burst into laughter, and this continued for a while. Generally being a very boisterous scene. The Telvanni troops present basically thought this was all a laugh, and that this was a joke that was being played, and this is awesome fun. And they were finally dispersed, and Flux turned back to the guy who's looking at him weird, and Flux says, "Oh, I think you can agree that that was just 20 random troops that I had no power to coerce, no ability to dictate their responses, and that I had not pre-selected. Wouldn't you agree?" And the guy just kind of looks at him, still shaking a bit. And Flux says, "So what's up, And the guy is looking at him, and this was actually a really well done scene between the two of us as we were role playing this, I thought, because the whole point was this kid was so overwhelmed with the moment that he didn't know what to say. And I'm going to kind of skip ahead a bit, I apologize, but basically the point here is that the Hlelu have been pushing a PR campaign, a very strong one, not just for years, but for over a decade, that the eastern part of the island is the bad part of the island. That's what Hlelu has been keeping us safe from. That is what Hlelu. If you, someone asked me once, if you commit a crime, what happens to you? And I gave some answers. In Hlelu, if you commit a serious crime, a serious offense, you are exiled to the east. Now, at that point, Flux came upon a thought and asked the general, "Do you have any former Hlelus here?" And he actually had several. And the guy came up and was like, "Yeah, I used to be Hlelu, and they banished me here. And then I just, everything was fine, and I signed up with the army, and I started doing something I was actually good at, and something, I liked doing." Which was an alien thought to the guy who was a farmhand, although he didn't want to be. I didn't mention that, but whatever. And so this conversation continues, and the full totality of the truth starts to hit the characters, the players, that this isn't simple brainwashing. This isn't, there's no magical compulsion here. These people have just been under the impression continuously and steadily for years upon years upon years that Hlelu is the last bastion of civilization on the island, and that in recent time, Hlelu has started moving for reunification of the rest of the island to get all the islanders free of the tyranny of Telvanni and Redoran. Now, if you've been paying attention, you could tell that Redoran is not anything like that. They tend to be believers in fairness and tolerance and dignity. And Telvanni, who are the rule people, are like that too. There's no actual tyranny or oppression going on over here. Flux finds that all interesting, so he goes ahead and has a chat with the kid, and finally says, "Okay, I need to head north and find out what happened." And so he is given a horse while Telvanni is left behind in order to try and sort out this situation and take in the prisoners, which at this point are basically refugees. But it occurs to Flux that his problem has just gotten much worse, because these people who formed this mercenary force, this band of troops that had moved on Telvanni soil, were not conscripts, mercenaries, or standard forces. These were recruits. These were people who volunteered. That's how powerful the PR was going on over there. And that's how large this force was, and they just pushed it back with this giant earthen demon thing. And so now the next response is guaranteed and is going to be bigger. He knows he has a problem. And so I went ahead and gave him an intuit roll, because on the other side of the island, Fiona Seal and Alexander had decided to go back to Iron Ridge, which is the Redoran capital, in order to report in and figure out what's going on, because Alexander mentioned something as an aside. Anyways, I'm sorry. I'll get to the Alexander thing in a minute. Flux successfully rolled his intuit and believed that she might go to there, so he made best speed for Iron Ridge. Now, Alexander mentioned that basically the order of events, they got the message, 6 hours or 7 hours ago now. They got the message. Ariana got the message. They translated it. They believed it. Alexander, being a duly elected representative, volunteered to sprint as fast as he could to the city. I mentioned all this. What I didn't mention is he got a few feet out the front door of Iron Ridge, and Maxim was there. I mentioned him earlier. He was the Telvanni agent who was lieutenant under the mage Vic. He was one of the first people they encountered way back towards the beginning. Well, Maxim was there with several people with him who tried to ambush him and kill him. That didn't go well for them. He took Maxim alive, brought him back in, and they found out that Maxim was a Hlelu agent. It was also deeply disturbing to everyone involved that Hlelu was able to get 8 agents in the Redoran capital at almost no notice, because we're talking a matter of minutes here from Maxim hearing, overhearing basically, about the plan to send Alexander north to getting 8 people in the Redoran capital. You get my point here. Obviously, Hlelu's reach is a little bit further than most people realized, is my point. Based on this, they decide they need to go back and figure out what they could find out about Maxim. Surely he knows something. So they make their way back, and Lieutenant Cowell's there, and he and Fiona Seal sit down to a meal while Alexander goes off and does whatever. And Cowell fills her in on some of the more mundane, boring information about what's going on, which I'll give you in summarized form. Ariana is a official individual who has the power to treat for the Kingdom of Alluvia, which is back on the mainland. The kingdom wants to basically there was no talks of a formal treaty between the two until, by more or less sheer chance, a dwarven expedition came up. Not a dwarven caravan happened into the area while they were discussing these things and was going to trade. Now, Ariana, who is a very observant individual, noticed that one of the pendants they were wearing, just one of the dwarves was wearing, was made of Pyrial. Pyrial, as I believe I discussed briefly, is a magically conductive material, and virtually all of the high-tech magic that was being used within the facilities I mentioned was using Pyrial in order to conduct that magic, just to give you an example here. So, for example, that survey room was wall upon wall of thick layered Pyrial, which had been woven and enchanted dozens upon dozens of times over the process of months. That's just basically what the more advanced civilizations use in order to have their technology. And I have to keep putting it in quotes because it is basically magical technology, but the point remains. Now, nobody on the island knew what this was. They find out from the dwarves that this is a rare metal that they have very little resources of because it's very hard to mine. Again, they don't have they don't have the capacity to mine particularly deeply or well, and so it is extremely rare. And House Hlelu usually takes most of it as sort of a bribe, blackmail, whatever you want to call it, in order to allow the dwarves to continue to operate so close to their territory. It is effectively bullying them out of it. But occasionally a dwarf will have a small amount of it, like this little necklace, and it's very hard material for them to work. But Ariana recognizes it, and without giving away too much, she starts talking with the dwarves, and she decides that what they want is this Pyrial. Now, at that point, that makes her interest in the dwarf clan rather than in the Redoran. However, Redoran, Lieutenant Cowell, who is at this moment actually Ambassador Cowell, he was the superior officer for Flux and Fear Seal, if you don't recall. Ambassador Cowell immediately says, we could offer military aid to the dwarven clans in order to as sort of a mutual treaty thing here for us to have a small percentage of the Pyrial in order to trade with the mainland, and you can use the rest to trade as you will. And what ends up happening is the dwarves basically agree not to deal with the problems themselves because they don't like dealing with that kind of political, economic problem, but rather they would rather that the dwarf clan actually formally joins House Redoran, and then that Pyrial becomes a resource that is available to House Redoran for House Redoran to treat with Alluvia. At this point, the Kingdom of Alluvia actually has a reason to care about this island, because previously, other than slaves or land, there's nothing really here. Not that they know, anyways, because nobody's mentioned the sanctuaries yet, and nor are they going to. Um, so a lot of this is hammered out, and Ambassador Cowell starts working out on actual agreements and blah blah blah. He also took Maxim aside personally to interrogate him. I never mentioned how, but he got a lot of information out of him. Now, some time passes, a couple hours actually pass, and Flux finally shows up here, and Flux and Fear Seal both start discussing the situation. They both share their respective stories of, oh my gosh, I can't believe we just took out a fleet and an army by ourselves. I don't mean to keep overselling it, but it was awesome. And they both, revel in their respective victories, and they share with Ambassador Cowell what's been going on and all that fun stuff. And then finally, Cowell lets them in on what he has learned. This is pretty much the end of the session here, because next we'll see what they do next. Maxim was a high-level agent who had been infiltrating Telvanni for over 6 years, He is not the only agent by far. There are actually dozens upon dozens in both Telvanni and Redoran. They are all part of what is known as the Confederacy, the Visayan Confederacy. And this is an organization that was founded by a man named Vilcus Goldtongue. Vilcus, 2 decades ago, roughly, was just another guy on the streets who decided to work his way up through common thievery and bulliyishness to the point where he got some money, and he proved to be very good at his craft. And basically crawled his way up from the dredges to become a governor. Over in Hlelu, you purchase governorship in order to have the right to govern a specific area. He managed this, and then immediately wanted to do whatever he wanted because it was his belief, and I mean this sincerely. He was what I would call a zealot, rather than someone who uses a belief to further his own cause. He genuinely believed that the people in power should have the right to do whatever they want, and he was bothered by the fact that he didn't. And so he set into motion a very large plan to unite the whole island basically under him, ultimately. It would be under Hlelu, and there would be webs of, these people reporting to these people, reporting to these people, report to him, but ultimately he would be in charge of everything, and the general consensus was those under him would also be able to do whatever they wanted, and those under them would be able to be well paid in order to ignore their conscience, and those under them would be given assignments of specific types that aren't objectionable, and this whole time they were going to push this massive PR campaign across every aspect of everything that, duh. This plan has been in action for over a decade. He has been very patient and very calm. And this first attack this first battle that just happened, was literally just the latest maneuver. And it is also worth noting, although I didn't tell the players this, but Vilcus expected this attack to lose. Maybe not, lose as badly as it did. Of course he didn't expect that. There's no reason to expect that. But he didn't actually expect it to get any major gains from this. Not militarily, but he did expect to gain it politically and publicly, because it was his belief that he could gain support from several of the civilians and from the governors within Redoran and Telvanni territories, several of which who were already a part of this Confederacy conspiracy. Now, ultimately, after debating the issues, they realized that all of it comes down to Vilcus. Vilcus, for whatever reason, has a massive amount of wealth. We're talking the level of gross in island, GIP, gross island profit, of several years worth of the entire island's production is in this guy's coffers. He is ridiculously wealthy, and no one's entirely sure why. Similarly, he is quite intelligent, and he is very on top of things, and he's very driven and ambitious. He is very literally the linchpin, the cornerstone of this entire confederacy, and it is the belief that if he or he and his most immediate supporters were removed, the rest of the things could be smoothed out over time. Ambassador Cowell, and indeed Flux also mentioned this, both are very strongly of the opinion that moving the PR in the opposite direction, which is something they've never done because they never had to, is something they're going to start doing immediately. And it may take a few years, but they believe that they can smooth this out if Vilcus is removed. If he is still in power, all of that money is still supporting all of those people who are still doing all of those horrible things, and he is still negotiating and giving out the orders and all that. Without him, they have no chance. And then he paused and he said, "There can be no officially sanctioned move against this man. He is officially just a governor, just a leader of a town, of a village or a city actually, in relative terms, just the leader of a city who has no particular, officially has nothing special about him whatsoever. He is just another governor, nothing special there at all, and he is very well liked by his people. Whatever is done to him cannot be officially done, and if anything is done to him by anyone, those people are not a member of House Redoran or House Telvanni." Now, they gave Ambassador Cowell gave Flux and Fear Nasil some intel on the circumstances. Basically, they do know where his private mansion is, which is described as a fortress, and they also know that he regularly takes a caravan to and from the capital city of Hlelu. It is most likely that this is where that his trips are to go there and specifically give orders to people in person during the meetings, and to actually, keep the wheels moving, right? And keep the wheels greased with money as well. They don't know where he keeps all of his money. Obviously, he has some of it on him at all times, but they don't know where he keeps his primary coffers. They do know he is well defended in both locations. And now we reach the point at which we have once again reached the now. The players need to decide how they want to deal with this, what they want to do next, where they want to hit him, if they want to hit him at all, and blah blah blah. And I don't know about you, but I'm actually rather looking forward to it. So I will talk to you guys later.